So you're about to enter into an agreement with another party, and you're wondering if this person can be trusted or not. Well, to analyze this, we're going to utilize game theory. Let's dive in. So game theory is one of those topics within economics that looks at the interaction between different individuals when my decision can have an influence on your decision. And therefore, it's looking at interaction between what we call players, and those players are typically two different individuals or two different companies or two different countries that are interacting. And this interaction can happen only once, or it can happen in a repeated approach. So to understand the repeated approach, we have to understand the one-shot kind of approach first, and that's what we're going to look into in this video. So in practicality, when we analyze these games, what we have to analyze is what are the different people that are involved, what are their possibilities, what are their choices that they can take, and then what are the outcomes that can happen in terms of payouts. How much money will they make if this company decides to do this while this other company decides to do that? In simple game theoretical games, we just look at two players with two possibilities. So the possibilities can be either to set a high price or a low price for both companies. Typically, a game theoretical game has two players and two possible actions. So if you're looking at two companies, you could either look at setting a high price or a low price. But then if you look at playing a game like rock, paper, scissors, well, that game has two players and three possibilities. And based on what each player chooses, they both simultaneously play. You have a situation where you are either winning and the other person's losing, or it's a tie. So if we draw that out, and we'll do this in class, you would have three possible outcomes for each. So you would have 9 complete possible outcomes that combines all of those possibilities. And based on that, you would have some situations where one wins, the other person loses, or a tie. Well, to come back to the simple scenario of two choices each, well, there's only 4 possible outcomes. And those 4 possible outcomes will have certain profit levels or certain payouts to the different people in this relationship. When we have these situations, you can have typical games where you can have what we call more like a prisoner's dilemma game, where there is a non-cooperative outcome, but there is a cooperative ideal where it's better off for people to cooperate. And what I mean better off is if you were to look at the payouts, the amount of money that they make, or in the case of the prisoner's dilemma, the amount of time they spend in jail, the cooperative ideal is better for everyone. So if we're talking about money, they're making more money, more profits for both individuals. And if we're thinking about prison sentences, they're both less time in prison than in the non-cooperative scenario. So that is one classic games that we often call kind of a prisoner's dilemma, because that is the usual example that we use for that. And I'll go through that in a separate video. But in that instance there, if we think going from non-cooperative ideal to the cooperative outcome, and we have a better situation for both, then this cannot be what we call a zero-sum game, because as one gain, the other person's not necessarily losing the same amount. So as you gain $1 million in profit, the other person is not necessarily losing $1 million in profit. So that shows us that cooperation can be good. The problem that arises in these games is that it's often better off to backstab the other individual. If you can make the other person believe that you will be cooperating so that you both act in a certain way, but in the end you do something different, you can end up having more money and them less, or less time in jail for you and more time in jail for them. So that is why this kind of game is very interesting, because we clearly have a worse outcome for both, a better outcome for both, and then there is these intermediate outcomes. So I said there's 4 possible outcomes, where one of the two gets better outcome than the cooperative ideal, but the other one gets way worse than the non-cooperative outcome. So that's the kind of dynamic at play here. So in this situation, we want to try to appear as trustworthy and as cooperative as possible. And the problem with these one-shot games is sometimes the other person might make you believe that they want to cooperate, but in the end, they act otherwise because in their mind, they have nothing to lose. If this game does not repeat itself, if they screw you over, that's the end of it. So if you think about like traveling and seeing a vendor that decides to overcharge, or a taxi driver decides to overcharge you for a certain service, well, they can make a lot of money fast by kind of screwing you over. But if you were to live there and you were to see them a lot, you wouldn't hire them anymore. You wouldn't buy from them anymore. You would buy from other people. So that trust has value. So although you can make more money in the short term if you screw the other person over, it's going to hurt you over time. And that's what different websites try to do when you have reviews, ratings. As soon as someone is deemed untrustworthy, it's really going to hurt their name, their reputation, and it's going to hurt their profits. But at the end of the day, the simple game looks at different strategies, different choices that each of the players can make. And if both act in their self-interest only and make their choice to maximize their own possible gains, we're going to end up in the non-cooperative outcome, which will be known as the Nash equilibrium in this class of games. If they both cooperate, they're going to end up in the cooperative ideal where both get better. But the problem with the cooperative ideal is it's an unstable agreement. That's an unstable equilibrium because there's always the incentive for one of the two players to backstab the other person to gain more temporarily. And that's why we say that the cooperative ideal is unstable, and the non-cooperative ideal, on the other hand, is an equilibrium situation, because if we start from that scenario, then no one wants to do otherwise. So if we think of the prisoner's dilemma, I'll go through the graph in a separate video, but if the cooperative ideal is for both individuals to deny anything that's happened, as soon as one of the two confesses, they can throw dirt on the other person, spend a lot less time in jail, and therefore get a better jail sentence or no jail, and the other person gets a lot more. So that's why both denying is not stable. But if we start from a situation where they're both confessing and they both spend an equal amount of time in jail, you don't want to be the one that decides to deny while you know the other person's confessing, because you're just going to hurt yourself more. You're going to seem uncooperative to the police, and because the other one's admitting to all your crimes, you will potentially spend a lot more time because this other person could just pinpoint all the crimes on you, and since you're denying, you'll just spend more time in jail. So same kind of story happens with businesses. So it's just important to understand there's a non-cooperative outcome, cooperative ideal, both get better, not stable. And then self-interest, if we analyze the strategies, and if you were to choose the same strategy, the same choice, regardless of what the other person does, that will be known as a dominant strategy. And all of this helps us understand how we can have possible gains from cooperation, but how these gains may be broken if someone decides to gain more in the short term. And in a separate video, we'll see that if this game repeats itself, there is value in developing trust, because that way you could get the cooperative ideal in a long period of time and not just think about short-term gains, because you'll know that if you backstab the other person, although you'll make more money temporarily, you're going to end up in a worse situation for following years before you build back trust. So always keep that in mind. You want to be as trustworthy as possible. Your word means a lot, and as soon as you break that, you might feel some short-term gain, but it's definitely going to catch you back at some point. So I hope this clarifies the basics of game theory. the basics of one-shot games, prisoner's dilemma type games. I'll catch you on the next one. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.